Hi all, thanks for coming. I've only been here since lunchtime, but seen some excellent presentations and always good to follow Jackie, who has got such good examples of what we're trying to do. Let me give you a little bit of introduction to who I am and where I come from. My name is Charles Baird. I'm the head of data architecture in the Data Strategy and Standards Directorate in the Central Digital and Data Office in the Cabinet Office. And that's the last time I will say that all at once. My team sits within the Data Directorate, and the Data Directorate is set up entirely to improve data sharing and data management across government. So we, as a business unit of the Cabinet Office, we split off from GDS, which I'm sure you've all heard of, a couple of years ago, with the idea that the CDDO would own policy and be more about intergovernment DDAP work, and GDS would be more citizen-facing. So all of the stuff we do is designed to help departments either share what they're doing around best practices in data and architecture, or learn from other departments effectively. So what am I talking about today? I'm talking about our API program, and that has one fairly simple, well, I can only get it onto 2 lines, goal, and that is to help departments produce APIs for use across government and beyond that are findable, consistent, and of high quality. So how are we doing that? There's a couple of caveats before we get into it. One is that this isn't the Cabinet Office coming from the centre of government going, the departments don't know how to build APIs or how to publish APIs. Loads of really good work doing. Jackie was just talking about some of the work that's happening in DWP. There are some incredibly mature organizations across government. HMRC has been doing excellent work with APIs for years. But our job is more about spreading that best practice and working as a center for enablement across government to allow that best practice and those approaches to be spread. So there's another assumption here, which is that although Jackie was talking about the very large number of developers who sit in DWP, still, a lot more development is done by external contractors or suppliers when building APIs in government, which is great, happy for that to happen, and they're often doing really good work. But what that requires is some kind of guidance and standards to help them develop in a consistent way. Final assumption, which I think probably most people in the room share too, which is that people want to use APIs. As Jackie was saying, the ability to access services and data through APIs mean that we can stand up better services for citizens. And we know that lots of private sector organizations want to access services like the ones Jackie was talking about rights to benefits, about right to work in the country and things like that, which can be integrated into company platforms. So 2 things I talked about 3 things, that's really 2 which we're addressing with 2 programs. One is about discoverability, and one is about quality assurance. So we'll start with discoverability. So there's a problem statement, and the basic problem here is that government's a big place, lots of APIs being generated, but it's really hard to find them because there's no single central place where you can search for a government API, and no standardized way for departments to publish details of those APIs centrally. So what are we going to do about that? First of all, I could be pretty clear that lots of departments are already building API catalogs. Some of them are on this slide. There are, if you search for government APIs on Google, you will find loads of different repos, whether it's a GitHub repo, like the Ministry of Justice have got there, whether it's something like the NHS Digital API catalog, which we hold up as an exemplar across government, or some of these other ones which are more home-built and running off internal systems. People are already doing this, already sharing these things, but there's no one place to find them, and there's no way to spark innovation, if you like. There's no way you come to this because you're looking for a specific API from the NHS or from the MOJ. You don't necessarily have a way to browse and see what's available. So what are we going to do about that? The idea, I used to work for an organization in the Cabinet Office called the Data Standards Authority. So obviously, I like a data standard. And what we are aiming to do is effectively build a small and lightweight data discoverability standard that can be published from an internal catalog and then consumed by either our central API catalog or, AN other catalog. So it's less about building a big monolithic central platform and more about enabling a layer of discovery that sits on top of those catalogs. So you see that is in the middle, the entire standard at the moment. I think it's got about 8 fields in it, in the JSON payload. We're not looking to run before we can walk. What we're doing here is testing this with departmental and teams' risk appetites to see, A, what you need to be able to share to enable that discovery, and B, what people are comfortable sharing. So on the back of that, we've got the government API catalog, which has got about 250 APIs in it, which is a pretty small fraction of the ones that are available. But what this is a proof of concept to show that there is a way to bring these things together. There is a way to publish to it. And we've got a connection to the NHS digital catalog, for instance, so that when that's updated, the central catalog's done as well. Some of it's still a little bit manual, but we're working on that. So on the discoverability side, what comes next? First is to build out those direct connections. So there's no point in having a catalog. I've been a data architect for quite a long time. There's nothing like a catalog that's updated manually for going out of date instantly, as soon as you've done the latest update. So we need something that's programmatically connected to catalogs. User testing, because it always sounds good, but also because we've got some assumptions about what you need to be able to find an API, and we have got some assumptions about the kind of people we think are looking for APIs, but there's not been a huge amount of work done exploring it and testing that hypothesis across government, so that's something we're doing a lot of over the next few months. And then I said we've got about 250 APIs on there. There's about 35 departments, so I think there are, last count, something like 25 big governmental departments, another 500 governmental bodies, so we've got a way to go to make sure that everybody who's publishing APIs is represented in there. So that's discovery, and I think before I move on to quality assurance, one of the things I will just mention, and just go back, something I should have said when I was talking about this standard, is that when I'm talking to vendors who sell API platforms or data catalogs, there's often a lot of, oh, we've got a product that does that. Plug this in, and you'll find out that all of your APIs can be visible across the estate. The trouble is, each of these organizations here is its own enterprise, effectively. We sit at a level above a collection of enterprises who aren't necessarily, or there are some misaligned incentives, and so not everybody's interested in publishing their APIs across the thing. Security teams are often quite nervous when you mention something called an open API spec, because it's not about open data. So the metadata model here is designed to be as lightweight as it can, so that we can assuage some of those issues and encourage people to publish. There you go, I've got out of the flow of my presentation there, but we'll get back. So the flip side of the complement to discoverability is making sure that those APIs are consistent and of high quality. And we do that through a process of quality assurance. So the assumption is here, or the problem statement is here, that once you've found the API you need, not a given, it takes a while. Once you've arranged access to it, again, Jackie was just talking about how you need to often sign a data sharing arrangement or prove what you're going to be using this thing for, which can be quite a lengthy process. Having done those things, it may still take you a long time to integrate with that API because they're not built in a consistent way. So, and again, this sounds like a value judgment. It sounds like I'm going out and saying people are building bad APIs across government. Not that at all. People are building different APIs across government, using different technologies and different approaches. And what we'd like to do is say, or have a situation where, having learned to integrate with an API from DWP, you don't have to relearn patterns to integrate one from the Department for Education. That these things are standardized with best practice, and therefore contractors, external developers can make some assumptions about what a government API will look like. We think you get to that through having standards in place to help people build them. So a couple of things we've done. One is, over the last couple of years, GDS started this, and we've picked up on it, building the government API standards, which I'll come back to. We're also looking at building a linting engine, or actually using a linting engine, but building a government API rule set, and also putting in place some security checks. So talking about the API standards to start with, this came from very much the same place as the things I was just talking about, that APIs are being developed in inconsistent ways across government. So being government, our natural inclination is to put some policy in place, put some guidance, and say, this is how you build APIs. So we did that. We're on to version 3. We've put in place some guidance around how you manage APIs and keep the life cycle of an API over the course of the life cycle of an API. So these get used a reasonable amount. We've got stats about how much they're being read. We talk to people across government about using them, but the truth is they've barely made a dent in the problem as guidance. So what we need is something that can do this a little bit more programmatically, that can be built into CI/CD pipelines and can be done, has that kind of layer of objectivity that you don't get from guidance. And we know that this is a problem because having built this rule set, we went out and scanned some public repos. So this is the results, a little dashboard we built on the back of a tool that went out and scanned some public repos on GitHub for looking for open API specs. It found about 300, I think, he said, looking at his screen. The important number on there is the number of warnings. So it was nearly 30,000 warnings over 300 APIs about how they were deviating from what we believe to be the best way to build, or the standard ways to build APIs in government. I'm not going to name and shame, and I won't leave this up too long in case anyone starts going, oh, I see this. Again, this isn't necessarily about errors or security problems. This is about ways in which these diverge from what we think is best practice. But you can see that there's obviously still a problem. So I talked about the linting engine, and this is what we've done. We've put something on GovUK, which we're testing at the moment, which allows a developer across government to plug in an open API document and get a result back. So this one, I've blanked out the name of the service. We got 38 out of 100, which is not a great score, but actually was one of the best ones in this particular batch. What we've done is try to make this quite easy for developers to consume and just to be able to see, how these things deviate from standards, importantly, what you can do to remediate that, so putting some code examples in, putting some detail about whereabouts in the spec this needs to be changed. And then as a kind of free gift on the side, we've made some security checkers involved. So there's a tool in the back that gives a score based on the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities for APIs, and that's a way for developers to both say, here's a useful tool which tells me that my API is secure and standardized. I can take that to my boss and say, look, I've got a badge from the Cabinet Office. So we're building this out as a tool at the moment and starting to test it with people. It's getting some really positive feedback. I think that there's an assumption that when we go out to departments and say, we think you should build APIs like this, that there's a bit of pushback. But actually, especially in a situation where you're brought in a time-limited sense to develop an API for the government, you're often quite grateful for tools that make that easier and kind of standardize what you're supposed to be delivering. So what's next for quality assurance? More user testing. Again, we're testing this with developers across a number of the bigger departments, across the Ministry of Justice, the Department for Education, and the Home Office at the moment. Using it both with developers and architects, so that you can both use it in a working situation. We're starting to develop a module that you can drop into, for instance, a GitHub action, so you can use it as part of your CI pipeline. Testing it to see how granular the rules need to be. At what stage do we start getting in the way of people being able to develop useful things, and where's the right level of standardization? On the back of that, we're expanding the rule set so that we're hoping it will effectively then be a model of the government API standards in code form. And then templates, question mark, that always gets me in trouble. There's a sort of assumption here that if we get to a certain point with the rule set, that you can come to it with effectively a blank open API spec and a data source and say, what do I need to do to build an API here? So what we're hoping long-term we get to is some kind of basic tooling to generate an API based on a certain kind of template that you get from the Cabinet Office. Right, I think that's it. That was a fairly whistle-stop tour of what we're doing, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Charles. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And Jackie was the first to start the stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Do you have any questions? So because we had some question about governance earlier, right?
Thank you. This is for the government itself, and there are some organizations which are sort of sub-government, like the solicitors organization or the organization for accountants. And we also, from HPC, also looking to integrate or use their APIs to verify if a business is really part of such organizations. And we encounter they don't have APIs or immature. Is this something you would looking to make available for them? Say, hey, we as a government organization have created this, use it for the other organizations?
Yes, absolutely. So the ambition, at least, is to make this available on GovUK so that anybody can use it. So that you can come and say, you know, if you're developing an API for government, then you can say, look, we've built this thing and it passes. We know that it passes all the Cabinet Office checks, so you can start using it. Kind of related government organisations like that will be able to use it as well. As Jackie was saying in the last question, I think that we have to be a bit careful because a lot of the time, APIs that you could get from the government, you're not going to be able to just self-serve, sign up and get access to because you need to have signed a data sharing arrangement or proved that you are who you say you are. But for this side of it, the tooling side, I think there's no reason why none of this is kind of secret or sensitive, and it all lives on a GitHub repo. So there's no reason why you couldn't use the tooling to test it, but also take the rule set and drop it into your own internal governance tools.
Hi, Charles. Thank you for that. Claire here. Claire Baird.
Hello, Claire.
You have the privilege of seeing, obviously, many different types of organisations at all sorts of different levels of maturity and adoption, interfacing with you. And I imagine that you also will see a big difference between the people who are very mature and sophisticated and far advanced, Jackie's organisation, for example, and maybe others that are very early in the journey. What are some of the signs and signals that you get when people kind of get it beyond the education? What does it look like when you kind of think, now they are ready to self-serve and all that sort of thing, rather than educate?
What an excellent question.
Yeah.
Really putting me on the spot there. But obviously, with the necessary nod to DWP at the start, one of the things that, one of the big tells, if you like, about that kind of maturity is when that kind of reference architecture is starting to be discussed at high levels. So if you've got directors and director generals talking about the need to use APIs to access these things, if you've got things being discussed at the highest level of management, then you know you're probably doing all right. I think that there's also a kind of, I would say this to some degree, but a kind of receptiveness to best practice from other organizations. So I think the really mature organizations know that good ideas come from anywhere, and you get a lot of, there's a lot of good communication between them. So for instance, and I would say this if Jackie wasn't in the room, DWP and HMRC are really good at sharing knowledge and coming to kind of at the API community that we run and bringing those best practice. And I said at the beginning that none of this is about the Cabinet Office saying we know how to do this better than departments do. It's about sharing that knowledge, and it's made really easy by the more mature departments who are willing to stand up and kind of say, this is how we do it. I think there's also a kind of, this is a bit harder to define, but I guess there's a willingness to embrace standards, and understanding that standards are crucial to effectively, this is about taking down overhead. It's about improving the onboarding thing. And people understand, the mature departments understand that actually standards give you guardrails and guidelines to speed up integration. And we do tend to find that the questions we normally get are either along the lines of, have you got standards to build APIs in this? Or, can we use, how do we write our own effectively? And we do have a model where we'd like talk about the quality assurance tool, and what we'd really like there is to be two sets of rules that are always being applied there. One that come from us, these are the very high and overarching rules for government, and then a second rule set that comes from the department, where it says, and this is how we do X, Y, and Z in terms of. And again, the more public that they make those, the easier it is for people to onboard and integrate with them.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.